Let's put on our tinfoil hats for a second. Have you ever watched an NFL game and something just felt off? The calls only seemed to be going a single direction, and the whole thing just seemed to be rigged? Well, today we're going to take a look at some of the most rigged moments in the NFL and see if they can hold up under the scrutiny. But before I get too deep into this topic, let's talk about how admittedly rigging a game would be kind of hard, right? There's so many loose-lipped, CTE-ridden players that can't stop themselves from showing their genitalia in public, much less trust them with a secret that would tank NFL ratings like the reffing strike of 2012. So we'll knock out why people even begin to think something like this could happen. And I think the number one point that gets brought up when you start to question them is the fact that the NFL is a sports entertainment company, since they are providing both sports and entertainment. Now, you might not get why this is alarming, but it is to some because that's the same type of listing as the WWE. It is different than how other corporations are listed, such as the International Olympic Committee or the NCAA, who are just general nonprofits and manage those sports that way. Thus, people kind of run to the conclusion that one could fix the games because the WWE fixes theirs. So let's start breaking down if this is true or why it might be. And I honestly found a very insightful UB law breakdown of these misconceptions because it has a bunch of legal jargon that I didn't understand, but essentially I'll try to break it down for you. It states that the law does not view the NFL as a single entity. Thus, anything done by the organization to fix the outcomes of games would break antitrust laws and should be illegal because it would be hindering the separate organizations. What that means is because all the different teams are trying to make their own form of revenue and they're not all under the NFL directly, they're more franchises, the NFL can't do something like say, hey Lions, you need to lose 15 games in a row, because that would obviously hurt ticket sales, jersey sales, all sorts of revenue. Thus, it's not allowed. That would be the NFL cheating in broad daylight. There's also another law that people will point to, which is the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961, that people will try to validate their claims with, which essentially says the NFL can avoid antitrust laws to bargain as a collective for TV deals, meaning they could get around the other clause I broke down before. But once again, if you actually read the law, there is an entire paragraph stating that this only applies exclusively to bargaining for TV deals and doesn't exempt them from other aspects of antitrust laws like fixing games, so that would still be illegal. Now you may think, boom, video over, I have just destroyed rigging allegations, but unfortunately that's not the case. It just means that there's no legal ways to rig games. So with that out of the way, let's take a look at some of the times the NFL appeared to be rigged and break them down. Let's start with my first encounter with something seeming off. The Blackout Bowl. Now, this game had everyone on high alert, and let me explain. It was the Ravens taking on the 49ers. The Ravens led by Coach John Harbaugh, the Niners led by Coach Jim, also Harbaugh. So fans already thought it was convenient that they both happened to make it to a Super Bowl within their first 5 years with a team that they were coaching, with John just hitting his 5th year and Jim being in only his 2nd year. It was also convenient that they were making their Super Bowl debuts against each other. And as close as most Super Bowls are supposed to be, this one did not start off the case. The Ravens were actually trouncing the 49ers and went into halftime with a 21-6 lead. Then the second half would kick off, and that kickoff would be returned 108 yards for a touchdown. The Niners would get the ball back, their quarterback immediately gets sacked, and boom, the blackout of the Blackout Bowl. 34 minutes of unprecedented nothing, longer than the average halftime, and when the game comes back, things look completely different. The 49ers mount the comeback of the century, down 28-6 at one point, and here they are after a Colin Kaepernick run brings them within 2, and now there's just mere seconds left in the game, and they are knocking on the door to scoring to win this game in what was about to be one of the craziest comebacks in Super Bowl history. And while this ended up actually not happening, people still couldn't help but feel like the whole situation was just a bit weird. The power going out after a huge momentum shifting sack, showing the Ravens were still hot, the length of the outage alone being as long as it was, and the fact that the Ravens being significantly older than the Niners meant that this is the exact event that would have had to happen for the Niners to get back in this game, since the Ravens' age means that they would have a harder time reheating after cooling off that long. Many just thought there was something nefarious about it, including the players. In the post-game interviews, even Jacoby Jones was speaking his mind about how he truly felt and how he knew that there was no way that should have happened. And ultimately, we'll never actually know what the reason was. But We were one Kaepernick pass away from the biggest fix in the history of sports happening right then and there. It isn't the only fix though, but sometimes the rig can come in a more subtle instance. I'm talking about the Tuck rule. Now, the backstory to this one is that there is a team known as the Patriots who are looking for a resurgence under their new quarterback, Tom Brady. You might have heard of them. They were able to get to the playoffs where they were taking on the Raiders, and the Raiders jumped out to an early lead in a terrible conditioned games and were up 13-10 with 1 minute and 50 seconds left, although a safety comes from behind and strip sacks Brady, killing dead in the tracks their Super Bowl dreams. Or so we thought. What was initially a pretty cut and dry strip sack fumble was brought up to the overlords in the sky and reviewed, and apparently this, what seems very clear fumble, was overturned and the Super Bowl hopes were still alive. Now, the ruling is this. NFL Rule, Section 22, Article 2, Note 2. When an offensive player is holding the ball to pass it forward, any intentional forward movement of his arm starts a forward pass, even if that player loses possession of the ball and he is attempting to tuck it back to his body. Also, if a player has tucked a ball to his body and then loses possession, it is a fumble. So according to a rule that was created in 1999, 2 years before its implementation in this game, it's not so much that the NFL was trying to rig the outcome of this game as it was just a really bad rule being implemented. But that's not going to stop people from being salty, especially with the ramifications of this game being a Super Bowl run and ultimately the start of the Brady Dynasty, which is another conspiracy that people like to talk about, which is the NFL selecting main characters and essentially rigging seasons to go in their favor. For instance, Barry McCockiner could go on for days about how essentially lucky Brady has gotten across his entire career to be able to even win 7 Super Bowls. And while admittedly the Patriots organization and Brady himself have been in some controversy for their own cheating, such as Spygate, Deflategate, and such, to be fair, the Patriots were just a consistently good team with a good defense, a good solid quarterbacks who wasn't going to make a lot of mistakes in clutch moments or put the ball in danger, and a coach who knew how to win games with a good defense and a sound running game. So while it's still extremely improbable to do what Tom did, and it may never happen again, the NFL pushing a single player conspiracy didn't really have very strong legs until 2020. You see, in 2020, Tom Brady signed with the struggling Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which now a narrative truly begins. Could Brady prove relevance on a second team, or was he just a Bill Belichick merchant? Well, Tom Brady, with the help of Bucs management, crudely assembles an offense including himself, Gronkowski, Leonard Fournette as late additions, which for how much would be on these three is quite the addition for sure. So surely they wouldn't be as in sync as the other teams of the late. Oh, okay, they canceled the offseason for everyone, so we'll all equally be out of sync. Now, obviously COVID was running rampant at the time, so I'm not saying the NFL invented the disease to push the Tom Brady narrative, but with how they handled it, where every team was going to come in rusty with offseason workouts being canceled, it definitely played perfectly into the hands of a few veterans being on a new team to be able to get their footing and not stumble too hard and make it to the postseason, which is exactly what happened. The Bucs moseyed their way through the season looking good, but not incredible, finishing 11-5. Then proceeded to go on an incredible Tom Brady trademark postseason run, stomping the Commanders, sneaking past the Saints while Brady throws for less than 200 passing yards, and then passing the Packers, and then the Buccaneers shines in the Super Bowl while absolutely tormenting Patrick Mahomes as their offense falls apart. You know, after being one of the most dominating offenses in the entire season, they look truly horrible in the Super Bowl while playing against the GOAT. And what some may say was just the Buccaneers exploiting the Chiefs' weakness, others will say it was all part of the script. But realistically, the Buccaneers were a good team regardless. This was their second year under head coach Bruce Arians, and the very next year they would go back to the divisional round after going 13-4 and would actually make the playoffs the next 2 years, despite the fact that they were only doing so in 2022 because they had a historically bad conference, only requiring them to have an 8-9 record to make it there. All that to say that it was a good team Tom Brady was on, so it didn't have to have too much going right for him to get back to the Super Bowl and win it. It does just feel a little convenient though, doesn't it? But this isn't just a Tom Brady narrative. In fact, some would say the very person he's playing in this game is going to be the next player pushed, bringing us to the most recent instance of rigging allegations. And while, once again, the Chiefs are just a good team, and good teams are gonna win Super Bowls, they've been known though for getting some pretty ticky-tack calls at the end of must-win games to push them over the edge. Notably, a really big holding call at the end of Super Bowl 57 during what many would call Sodgate because of the poor quality of field, causing many slips which people claim nullified the defenses to allow for the team with the better offense to win. And you know, that might be a stretch. I'm just telling you what's out there. But this year, the Chiefs came off their Super Bowl slumber hot, but hit a mid-season lull that many believed showed that they were not the Chiefs of the past. In fact, their offense looked terrible, and they were really not doing well against any of their stiffer competition. And now it may sound like they had a bad season, and by Chiefs standards they did, only going 11-6 and having to play in the wild card round, which is rare, but you see many people believe their luck was going to turn around before they even got into the playoffs because of one person. And was that person Mahomes? A little bit, but the reality was because the Chiefs had gained a new superfan, Taylor Swift, the new girlfriend of star tight end Travis Kelce. And as they saw viewership ratings go up every single week, they gave her that 0.5% screen time. They saw that they could tap into an entirely new demographic. So now with that information, let's see how the playoffs went. Well, they won over the out-of-water Dolphins. Then they had to go on the road in the playoffs for the first time ever in back-to-back weeks. And what happened those weeks, except for, of course, the Bills have Wide Right Part 2, which should have brought the game at least to overtime. Whether or not they win it there is up to them. But then the Ravens called their worst offensive game, maybe of the last decade, as Lamar, for whatever reason, refused to properly scramble and the OC refused to run the ball. And you might say, well, Isaac, that's the other teams playing bad. Do you really think the NFL had any involvement? And I'll just say this. One thing that they can control is the refs, and not what the refs call, but who the refs are and which refs they give them. And the referees assigned to the away game was Sean Smith and his crew, who have had some interesting stats going around them. According to Sharp Football Analysis, this crew favored away teams heavily, with home teams being only 17-29-3 while covering the spread against them. He called over 200 more yards of penalties against home teams, and it absolutely showed this game. The Ravens, who averaged around 56 yards of penalties a game, committed 8 penalties for 95 yards, their second most of this entire season, while the Chiefs, who averaged only 49 yards a game, put up 3 penalties for 30 yards. And you can just add this to Smith's abysmal 40.8% win percentage for the home team in games that he's reffing, and this spurred the Chiefs to the Super Bowl, where you could argue the NFL had no vested interest in who won that game as long as Taylor Swift was there in attendance, which she was, by the way. And did you know that this ultimately was the most watched Super Bowl of all time, despite those who commonly watch the NFL seeming to have no interest at all in watching this game? But since this video is getting a little long, I'm just going to wrap this up. Whether you believe the NFL is rigged or not is up to you. But I hope you got a little bit more context on why you believe it is, and let me know in the comments some other times you felt like it was fixed and if I should do a part 2 for this. But as always, have an amazing day and peace.